Okay, up on the agenda is presentations and proclamations. Right up, number one is Sutter Buttes Flood Control Flood Efforts Update. Presentation by Mike Amani, Executive Director of Sutter Buttes Flood Control Agency. Welcome, Mike.
Good evening, Mayor Gill, members of the council, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to make a presentation on behalf of the agency. I'm joined by Director of Engineering, Michael Bissett.
Welcome, Michael.
So we're going to give an update basically on last year, accomplishments of last year, what we're planning this year, beginning with the recent advertisement for a $90 million construction project this week, and some of the challenges that we face in the coming year as well. Thank you. So I'll start with a little bit, spend just a few moments on background for those who are not, heavily involved with the project. Programs and projects that we're involved in, that you're hearing your constituents are involved with. 2013 highlights, 2014 objectives and challenges, and we'll have some time for some questions. So, the basin for which the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency has responsibility for is bordered by the Cherokee Canal to the north, Feather River on the east, Sutter Buttes and the Sutter Bypass in the west and southwest. It's about 300 square miles, $7 billion worth of damageable assets by the Corps of Engineers estimate, and about 95,000 people. The need for the projects, and there's our series of projects, and we'll describe the biggest, most visible construction project we're embarked on right now, our public safety, to reduce the economic impacts to this community due to FEMA floodplain mapping, and to comply with SB 5, which is a new bill that was passed in 2007. Now, when the assessment district was formed in 2010, we stated our goals were to get 200-year protection for the communities of Biggs, Gridley, Live Oak, and the majority of Yuba City, and get 100-year protection for the remainder in the basin in the south. None of that has changed, and we've just started construction this year to get that 200-year protection for the north. So there's three major programs you're hearing about if you're not directly involved with them. The Feather River West Levee project, that's the most visible design and construction project. We just broke ground this year, last summer. And that is the first of a series of contracts that will result in the completion of about 35 miles of repairs to the west levee of the Feather River. It's important to note that this is a locally led project. It's funded 25% local, 75% state bond 1E monies, but it's locally led by your communities, by your leadership, by leadership from members of this council, as well as Biggs, Gridley, Live Oak, Sutter County, Butte County, LD1 and LD9. The Sutter Basin Feasibility Study is a core federal project. It's led by the Corps of Engineers. It's funded by state, local, federal cost shares. The importance to the basin is that it does some stuff that the state is not going to fund, and that's just sort of the bottom line. There's been a lot of frustration associated with Corps projects in the past. This project is on its way to getting federal authorization, appropriation, and it may very well result in some hardcore construction about the time we're winding down with the Feather River West Levee project, which concludes in 2016. So it's important to us. It's not a background activity anymore. It's a major project that's going to contribute to the safety of the basin, including Yuba City. The Feather River Regional Flood Management Plan is a locally led project, but unlike the Feather River West Levee project, it's a partnership between Three Rivers Levee Improvement Authority, Marysville Levee Commission, and Yuba County Water Agency. SBUFCA is one of 4 partners in this effort to prioritize projects on both sides of the Feather River, extending from Thermalito in the north down to the confluence in the south, both sides of the river. So we're in partnership to prioritize how we want to manage flood risk in the basin. That includes both sides of the Feather River. And that is a state-funded project, 100% state funding, but again, it's a locally led project. It's a little unusual because it's part of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, which is a state plan, but the state made the decision to hand over this planning effort to partnerships like the one that's formed for the Feather River. So I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Michael Bissett, who will talk a little bit more detail about the Feather River West Levee project.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the public. My name is Michael Bissett. I'm the Director of Engineering for the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency. So it's my pleasure tonight to give the council an update on our Feather River West Levee project. Just quickly to talk about the project in general, it's 35 miles of levee repairs. We broke the project up into the different color areas you can see on the map here. So starting up in the north is our project area D. In the yellow is our project area C. That's the area that's currently in construction. And then project area B is the blue area. So those are three components make up Feather River West Levee Project 1. And then the red component way down in the south, that's the next phase. So that's in the future. Right now we're in design and construction of Feather River West Levee 1, so B, C, and D. The majority of our project, like I said, it's 35 miles of levee repairs. The majority is 27 miles of slurry wall construction, the remainder being seepage berms and relief wells. Those are the primary tools that we're using to correct the deficiencies of the levees that we have along the Feather River. Our goal, as Mike stated, 200-year level of flood protection for the urban areas and 100-year in the South Basin where you have the deep flooding potential. We broke our project into three phases, B, C, and D, and we did a risk prioritization on how to implement those projects. So essentially, we evaluated the different areas, and essentially people and property were the primary risk-based decision makers of how we roll these projects out. And we also looked at project logistics, such as real estate acquisition, utility relocations, other types of components that go into making a project happen. So that's how Project Area C became the first construction project out the door, which started last year. Total project cost, $280 million. That's cost shared with the state and the locals at a 76-24 breakdown. And ultimately, we'll get federal dollars into our program through one of the studies, as Mike talked about. So quickly, to talk about last year, a very successful year for Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency. We were able to begin construction on Project Area C in 2013, as was promised back in 2010 when the assessment district was passed. We were very happy to make that goal a reality. A lot went into being able to allow us to begin construction. We had to have all our environmental documentation completed. We had to get our regulatory approvals and permits, and most importantly, we had to get our 408 permit approval from the Army Corps. And that was really the long lead item, and that's what caused the delay. And when we started our construction in 2013, we weren't able to start in April, which is ultimately the best time to start levee construction. We were delayed into July, and that's when the Army Corps ultimately approved our permit. Therefore, we were only able to build in the Shanghai Bend area of Yuba City. So we completed 1.5 miles of levee improvements in 2013. We had contractor working. We had 3 deep soil mixing rigs that are shown on the slide here. That equipment was operating 24 hours a day, 6 days a week in order to complete that 1.5 miles, because we had very deep slurry wall construction that had to take place in that area. And as many people know, that's the site of the 1955 break. So really, it was high on our priority list, and we got that work done in 2013. Also, we were able to complete designs, essentially complete the designs for project areas B and D. We were able to get those approved through our partner agencies, the Army Corps, Department of Water Resources, and our independent panel of experts. So we were able to wrap those documents up and get them ready to go out to bid. Lastly, on the feasibility study with the Army Corps, we hit a major milestone, which is the last bullet, the Civil Works Review Board. So that was that review board was in Washington, D.C. Of the Army Corps, their review board. They ultimately approved our study and authorized their staff to take it to completion and turn it into a chief's report, which goes to Congress. So it was a major milestone in the many years that it took to get it to that point. So very successful outcome. So launching into 2014. We have a lot of objectives that we're looking to complete, and I wanted to highlight some of those tonight. So Project Area C, which we started last year, we're going to complete that project this year. So that's another 13 miles of levee construction that will be completed in 2014. So we're ready to begin construction as soon as the Central Valley Flood Protection Board allows us to, which is typically April 15th. Given the unfortunate drought conditions, there's a chance we may be able to start our work sooner. So that would be maybe a positive outcome of a bad situation. For project areas B and D, I'm very happy to let the council know that we are officially out to bid. We were out to bid yesterday. That was our first day. We plan to open bids on March 4th, which is, right around the corner. So we're quickly moving those project areas forward also. We're going to hold a mandatory pre-bid meeting next week here in these chambers. We already have 10 plan holders for this project, so we're looking forward to receiving our bids on March 4th. We'll be taking a construction contract to the Sabufka board in March and awarding contracts and quickly getting into construction for those projects. So 2014 is going to be a very busy year for this region. We're going to have work occurring in project areas B, C, and D. We're going to have a lot of equipment out there, many headings, many miles of levee are going to be worked on at the same time. So it's going to be a very busy year, very successful year. Also, in 2014, that's when we're going to complete the feasibility study, now that the Civil Works Review Board authorized the completion, turning it into a chief's report. That is quickly moving forward. So Mike and I are meeting with the Army Corps almost weekly now. We're going to start that constant engagement. They have staff in D.C. now working on completing the document, and we're looking forward to finishing that up this summer and then sending it off to Congress for authorization. Then lastly, on the regional study, that project is also set for completion in 2014. So that will set the stage for Sabufka, along with other flood control agencies, putting their markers in place with the Department of Water Resources, outlining what their projects are, prioritizing those projects, and then trying to compete for money as best that we can. So we have a lot of activities going on, and we're looking forward to a very successful year. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike to close up. So thank you very much.
Before Mike starts, through the mayor?
Sure.
I have a couple questions for you, Mike. You said that we finished a mile and a half from Shanghai Bend. Were we able to connect into the section of Yuba City that was repaired previously? So is this area protected all the way up to north of the city?
Yes, we connected to the existing wall on the north of the Shanghai Bend levee and then on the south also.
All right, and just for the public's benefit, you mentioned slurry walls, relief wells, and the berms. Could you explain what those are so that the public understands what it is this project is entailing?
Absolutely, thank you. It's something we talk about all the time, so yeah, I tend to lose that perspective. So slurry walls are, they can be constructed in several different ways, but they're essentially a 3-foot wide wall that is constructed typically through the center of the levee down to a clay layer of soil, and it provides a barrier for water from passing through or underneath the levee. And they're typically built with a bentonite, which is a clay material, and the existing soil and water. So you have almost like a semi-rigid wall that would be underneath the levee. And what I showed earlier with the deep soil mixing machines, if the walls have to go really deep, you can use those machines, and they're almost like paddles, and they mix the materials together and it's you can also use cement in those type of walls. So it depends on the nature of the geotechnical conditions, but those are slurry walls. So another way to help remediate deficiencies from underseepage is the construction of relief wells. And as the water, if you don't have any protection, the water can build a lot of pressure as it moves through and underneath levees. And if it has enough pressure, it starts moving material, and that's what causes boils on the land side, ultimately can lead to levee failure. So the relief wells, they take the pressure out, they discharge that water in a controlled manner, and that's another method of providing relief to a levee system. Lastly, on the seepage berms is essentially earthen structures on the land side of a levee that provides enough protection, and it knocks down the head of the water that goes underneath the levee, and it dissipates it enough of the energy of that water, and it doesn't cause problems. So those are three types of methods that you can use to solve the problems that we have now.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Mike and Michael, thank you guys very, very much. I think
I think Mike's got one
Mike's
last
gonna wrap
slide.
it up? Okay.
I apologize. I'll make it very fast. This is the last slide.
That's fine. One of the things that I did want to point Mike as well, and I think for the general public, is about 3 years ago, nobody knew what this levee project was, especially the Sutter Basin. And having been back in Washington, D.C. with lobbying efforts, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Office of Budget Management, and pretty much a lot of the members of Congress all know about the Sutter Basin levee project, simply for the fact because of this community getting behind it and passing our local share of the tax. Without that, we probably would have not been in line for the 1E funds. And because of our community's efforts, we're able to finally, for once and all, fix 44 miles of this levee. And had we not been able to pass this, Yuba City would have been declared in a flood zone area, which means for the rest of the umpteen 30 years, we would have been paying FEMA premiums for flood insurance. And this community would have probably come to a screeching halt. So we literally were racing against time. And I think the efforts of this community, efforts of the Sutter Buttes Flood Agency and all the board members were able to move this thing along. And now, with almost $90 million of bid work going out, that's huge for this area. And our goal was to try to get this done local as possible. And hopefully with the economies of scale, because it's a large enough project that it'll probably come way under budget. So.
Thank you, Mayor Gill. I just wanted to point out some challenges that we're going to be facing. So we painted I wouldn't say a rosy picture, but a picture of some successes and a tall order for the remaining 33 and a half miles of repairs that are going to be ongoing in 2 years. These are the challenges that we'll be facing. And as in the past, as you pointed out, Mayor Gill, the leadership of members of this council who sit on the Sabufka board, as well as the council itself and the community, paid big dividends when we go back to D.C. It's extremely important when groups like NGOs, like this council, like the many communities, the Taxpayers Association wrote a letter. It makes a big deal when that kind of support shows up in D.C. and people pay attention. So it's a real credit to the community. Now, some of the challenges, state funding. So the state has funded design and permitting to date. One would think that funding of construction, particularly when you're out to bid, would be a slam dunk, but it's a very slow process. And so we're working with the state basically to get through what is literally a process to make sure the funding continues to flow and that we don't have any hiccups. So we expect to be successful, and where we don't expect to be successful, we have other ways of demanding that kind of continuance of funding for what's a very important project to the region. Right-of-way is always on the critical path. Acquisition of right-of-way is so important to a linear project like this, and thus far the agency has been successful in acquiring right-of-way so construction can move forward in a logical and straightforward pattern. We talked about the feasibility study. That's really one step in what is a long federal process. So it's just a planning report. It takes an act of Congress to authorize the project. It takes another act of Congress to get appropriations, and then the whole Corps of Engineers process starts with hardcore design and construction. We benefit from the fact that WRDA, the Water Resources Development Act, this bill that's in conference committee, it may be one of the shining lights of true bipartisanship in Washington, D.C., and it so happens that the timing of our feasibility study meets that criteria so far to be authorized. We don't know what's going to come out of conference committee in D.C., but things look about as good as they could be in terms of timing. The urban level of protection is something that folks are going to start talking about, and actually we're working with your staff right now to address. And these are the requirements that came out of the Senate Bill 5 back in 2007. And the reason they start kicking in is because communities like Yuba City have to start thinking about general plan amendments that are due in 2015. So we've been working closely with your staff to make sure that those deadlines are met and that the project will meet all of the requirements for 200-year level of flood protection. And finally, FEMA changes. That's one of the big impacts so far, as you pointed out, Mayor Gill, and I just reemphasize that but for this project or the impending funding of this project way back in 2010, FEMA has held off mapping this region into the floodplain. But for this project, much of this area, including all of Yuba City, would be paying the high insurance rates because we all know that we don't meet 100-year criteria. We'd be paying those high insurance rates. And so, so far, FEMA has been held at bay, and now with real construction happening, there's no reason for FEMA to come in, and we've been able to delay that floodplain mapping. Those are the challenges. That's my last slide. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to respond to them.
Questions for Mike?
Yeah, through the mayor. Mike, we started on segment B, and then segment C, and then we're starting on segment C and D. Is segment A part of this year 2015, or is that a separate project?
That's a great question. So C is the area right adjacent to Yuba City. B is immediately south of Shanghai Bend to Star Bend, and then D is everything north to Thermalito. A is the area south from the confluence in the south, confluence with the Sutter Bypass to Star Bend. So that area is in the planning phases right now. That's the levee that protects largely the rural areas of the deep floodplain in the south. Frankly, the state would not fund south. They had some reservations about funding to the south. It's our goal to do that, and we've set aside budget to repair that south, but we can only do it leveraging state monies to do that. So we'd have a project that's with the Department of Water Resources right now to start work on that as early as 2015, right about the time we're winding down work here. So that work is ongoing. That's slated for 2015 to complete protections to south of Laurel Avenue in the south. Moreover, the federal feasibility study just confirmed that there's a federal interest in repairing that. So it's very possible. It's hard to believe, but it's very possible that the federal government may actually come in with a contractor and do the portions that the state will not do.
That's not guaranteed right now as far as...
No, we have to go through the authorization appropriation process.
If the portions of the levee in Project A is damaged, doesn't that backflow to Yuba City?
So the southern portion, so water ponds in the south, and if it's allowed to pond all the way back into Yuba City, it does hit the southern sphere of influence of Yuba City. Now, in the past, in fact, in the 55 flood event, and as in typical flood events, in fact, this happened in Meridian and as recently as 1997. Typically, a flood fight involves breaching a levee to relieve ponding, so that doesn't happen. The reason I bring this up is because we're fronting a proposal to preposition a breach of that southern bypass while we're repairing the levees to provide protection to the south part of the basin, but as a backup plan to have a relief structure in the south so that this kind of ponding the effects of ponding in the south would be minimal to Yuba City in the event of a flood fight.
If Project A doesn't happen, do the residences in the South Yuba City, would their flood insurance, would they have to get flood insurance? Are they still in the 100-year floodplain?
Right. So what happens is the assessment district was set up so that, as we said, we're shooting for 200-year protection in the north and 100-year protection in the south. There's a portion of Yuba City that are paying, the southwest corner of Yuba City, they're paying less assessment because they're getting 100-year protection to get out of the FEMA floodplain. And so we're working to get 100-year protection through the federal project and through the state of California to ring around the basin. And that's ongoing right now. We just don't have the funding to start construction until about 2015.
And it would actually take Project A and the federal project of the bypass to get 200-year?
The bypass, okay, under state law, the bypass, and this has not changed. When the assessment district was formed in 2010, the bypass is the obligation of the state under Water Code 8361 to fix the bypass. Now, the issue with that is that even though it's, state law that the state's supposed to come in and fix that, that's not their priority. There's existing bond funding, and it may be a while before the state funds the repair of the Sutter bypass. And so right now we're looking at what we can do locally with existing local funds and existing bond funds to provide protection for that southwest corner so nobody's paying flood insurance. It's a complicated topic because the state's obligated to do that, and just like all public agencies, they will tell you, yes, we're obligated to do that, that's under the law, but they have other priorities.
Thanks, Mike.
Other questions for Mike?
I just have a comment for him and his staff. I went down and walked a portion of the levee this morning at Shanghai Bend, and I will, and I really think that this is important for the public to understand that as all of that construction moved through there, there was minimal impact left behind through the project, with the exception of a levee repair, meaning that all of the homes down there, not a lot of complaints from the homeowners. They went through this process all the way to the yard that they put together, that they used, has all been cleaned up, put back together. The levee's been repaved on top. It's just an amazing project and just a quality project. And they were still down working on it this morning to smooth out the kind of the final edges of it, it appeared. So I just really want to point out to individuals, especially when we talk about right-of-way and moving further north, that even though that the impact will be for potentially months moving through an area, that it's a quality project that's taking place. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mike.